All right, let's talk about fear for a second. Not the kind of fear when you watch a horror movie and you know the scary part is coming. No, not that. I mean real fear. The kind that creeps in when you're lying in bed at night and hear a noise you know wasn't there before. Yeah, that kind of fear. Now imagine you're 80 years old. You've lived a long life, raised kids, maybe even grandkids. You finally get to that stage of life where you should be resting, right? Enjoying the simple things. Tea before bed, a good book, the sound of wind outside, and then, in the dead of night, the power suddenly cuts out. The phone line disconnected. And before you can even process what's happening, there is a man standing in your room, dressed in black, wearing gloves, watching you. You see, for nearly 20 years, a man named Delroy Grant, born in Jamaica, became one of the most feared criminals in the UK. Yes, you heard that right. He was born in Jamaica. He was Jamaican, which is why this case hits a little closer to home for us here at Watson's World. He was known across Britain as the Night Stalker. Delroy wasn't just breaking into homes, he was hunting his victims. He targeted the elderly, attacking and assaulting them while they slept, leaving entire communities in fear for their lives. Now, this sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood thriller, right? Some movie where the detective races against time to catch the villain. But this was real. And for 2 decades, the police were always one step behind. In this episode of Watson's World, we're diving deep into this terrifying story. How Delroy Grant evaded capture, how a single police mistake gave him years of freedom, and how justice finally caught up with him.
But you have to say for yourself.
What's for dinner?
What's going on here?
What's that stink?
What's this for?
What time is it? What's that?
Elementary, my dear Watson.
Hey peeps, this is your host, Kevin Watson, and with me is my beautiful daughter.
Kevina Watson.
Yeah, man, big up yourself, Kevina.
Thank you.
Yo. This story is quite an interesting one.
Quite a doozy.
Yeah, and we really wanted to take a break from our other stories where, we looked at stories coming out of Jamaica.
Yeah.
This still has to do with a Jamaican, but we felt like, we wanted to venture into the UK. As you know, the UK is one of those places where we have a lot of Jamaicans migrating.
Yeah, we have strong ties with the UK.
Yeah.
So.
Now, here's the thing about Delroy Grant. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't think twice. He was tall, well-spoken, always clean-cut, well-dressed, carrying himself with confidence. He wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. Always moved with a kind of calm control. Like a man who had everything figured out. And people often mention his smile. Oh, he had one of those smiles, the kind that makes you feel like he's trustworthy. Like he's the kind of man who would hold the door open for you, help an elderly lady across the street, or offer a neighbor a hand with groceries. He was a very likable guy. He had friends, neighbors who thought highly of him, a reputation for being a stand-up guy. He was a father, a husband, not once but twice. He had multiple children. And I don't know if this is kind of typical of Jamaican men. It seems like this is, if you ask most people, they'll tell you, yeah, that's Jamaican men for you.
Hey, tread lightly,
I'm going to tread lightly, Kira. Because I'm also Jamaican, But here's the part that really throws people though. He was a full-time caregiver for his sick wife. Yeah, you heard that right. His second wife, Jennifer, had multiple sclerosis. She was in a wheelchair, completely dependent on him. And Delroy, well, he bathed her, fed her, took her to church, pushed her in her wheelchair. People looked at him and thought, that is a good man. That is a man who takes care of his own. But at night, he was like Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. I don't know if you have ever heard that story. Jekyll and Hyde?
I haven't.
Like this doctor who had two personalities, like two sides to him. Well, yeah, at night, Delroy became something else entirely. Just a completely different person. Now, let me ask you something. How many of you have ever had a neighbor, a co-worker, or maybe even a friend that you thought was a good person, only to find out later that something about them wasn't quite right? Now imagine that same friendly neighbor, the one who smiles at you every morning, was secretly one of the most prolific serial rapists in British history. That's Delroy Grant. And what makes him even scarier, he was so good at what he did. The police couldn't catch him for nearly 2 decades. That's 20 years.
Dad, I have a question to ask you.
Yeah.
Do you know of the original Night Stalker?
I have seen it advertised on Netflix. Like, I really want to watch it. People have watched it, say it's quite scary.
Yeah.
I have it on my playlist, but
Yeah.
I probably watch it next.
So for the viewer them who don't know like who the Night Stalker is, he actually goes by the name of Richard Ramirez, and he's one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States of America. Now both him and Delroy, right, they're deemed as night stalking criminals because they commit most of their crimes at night,
Yeah.
right? But they are two different people. They have different personas and methods when carrying out their wrongful doings.
Yeah.
Now, Delroy, right, he attacked the elderly, right, well, while maintaining a facade that he was a trusting and caring person. But Ramirez, he was a sadistic, chaotic murderer
Yeah.
who attacked indiscriminately. He attacked men, women, children. Like, this man did not care,
Yeah.
right? So while Grant, he pretended to be a good person,
Yeah.
Ramirez, he embraced his evil wholeheartedly
Yeah.
and showed no remorse whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, the both of them ended up, evading being captured for years. But the main difference is that Ramirez, he thrived off of fear. He thrived off of making people afraid of him, while Grant, he thrived off of deception.
Yeah, well, I think both these individuals, both these Night Stalkers thrive off fear.
Yeah.
I mean, when we get more into the Delroy Grant story, you're going to see that. By the way, I learned something new, a new word, gerontophile. These are people who are attracted to older people. So Delroy Grant was actually a gerontophilia, like gerontophile rather. It's called gerontophilia, and then the person is called a gerontophile. Because most of his victims were very old people, most of them were over 80 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, based on like police speculation, they were saying that, Delroy's actions were influenced by like some incident that happened in his like childhood.
Yeah.
Where he was sexually molested by a woman that was older.
An older woman.
Yeah.
And that's like a thing in Jamaica for, it's like a lot of younger boys would say, yeah, their first time was with a much older woman.
And that's awful, man. But there's no evidence to support it.
Yes.
And I think Delroy would be the only person to confirm it or verify it.
All right, let's rewind a little and talk about where he came from. Delroy Easton Grant was born in Jamaica on September 3rd, 1957. He was raised by his elderly aunt after his mother walked out when he was just 2 years old. His father, George Grant, was a hard-working truck driver who later moved to the UK. When Delroy turned 15, his father sent for him, hoping the boy would have a better future in England. And for a while, it seemed like things were going well. Delroy was smart. People said he had a way with words, a natural charm that made people feel comfortable around him. At 19, he got married to his first wife, Janet Watson. I know we are not related. I don't think we're related.
No.
No, they had 2 sons together, Delroy Jr. and Michael. Janet said that at first, Delroy was attentive, charming, everything you'd want in a husband. And I feel like that's typical of most relationships.
Yeah, like during the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? But here's what she said. She said that he changed. Like quickly thereafter, he was like a different person. She described him as controlling, obsessive, and quick to anger. He had a thing about cleanliness. If the house wasn't exactly how he wanted it, he would lose it. He would just snap. I feel like a lot of Jamaican men are, they like cleanliness.
Yeah.
Like even, myself coming from Jamaica, we kind of grew up with that culture. But to lose it over, somebody who may not, somebody who may not clean the house the way you want or clean things the way you want.
Yeah.
And if it's not clean the way you want, then go do it yourself, right? She said that it even got worse.
Mm-hmm.
She claimed that he attacked her while she was in labor with one of their children. Oh, let that sink in for a second. She was literally giving birth to his child. And instead of supporting her, he was hitting her. And after one final brutal beating, she fled. Now, of course, most men, after losing their wife and kids, might take a step back and think to themselves, maybe I need to change. Maybe I need to be a better person. But not Delroy. He just moved on. One relationship after another. More children, more women. And then he met Jennifer Edwards, his second wife, the one in the wheelchair. And this was his perfect disguise. Because think about it. Who would ever suspect a full-time caregiver, a man who spent his days pushing his wife in a wheelchair, attending church with her, helping her eat, helping her bathe? That is what made him so dangerous. Because no one, absolutely no one, was looking at him. I mean, no one thought for a second that this man, who seemed to be so kind, so responsible, so patient, was secretly terrorizing an entire city. And by the time the police figured it out, it was far too late.
No, I heard you mention that Delroy Grant had 2 wives. No, he actually fathered a total of 10 children with 5 different women. Yeah. So, I know you mentioned Janet Watson.
Mm-hmm.
He had 2 sons with her, Michael and Delroy Jr.
Yeah.
And then he went on to have 2 more kids with Jane Finley during their relationship. I don't think it was anything serious.
Okay.
Because he went on to have his second wife, Jennifer Edwards. And with Jennifer, he had a total of 5 children with 2 sons, Jason and Louis. And then he went on to father 3 more children with another woman while he was still married to Jennifer.
And when you say father, 3 more kids in, they were his salary?
Yeah,
his kids?
No, kids that were not his.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he was taking care of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why people looked at him as a good man, because here it is that he was fathering kids that were not his.
Yeah, I think that more feeds into his facade.
Yes.
That he's a good person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it something that he did intentionally?
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't know that.
Right. All right. let's take it back to 1992, Southeast London. It's late. An elderly woman in her late 80s is asleep in her bed. She wakes up suddenly. Something feels off. Then she sees him, a shadowy figure standing over her bed. She tries to move, but she can't. Then she notices the lights are out. The phone line is dead. The window is open, but not broken, just open. She's trapped, and the man in black, he doesn't say a word. Then he holds her down. She pleads. She begs not to hurt her, but he doesn't care. Because here's the thing, she had just recently had a hip replacement surgery. But for hours, he stays in her home, he rapes her, strips her of her pride, then steals her jewelry and money before vanishing into the night. You know, she had to walk to her niece's house a few blocks down after all of this ordeal just to call the police. Now, this was also the first time the police were able to get a DNA sample left by Delroy after he ejaculated during the encounter. That was just the beginning, because this wasn't an isolated case. Over the next few years, more elderly victims, both men and women, wake up to the exact same nightmare. The power is cut, and he sneaks into their house and literally finds the breaker system and cuts the power. They would also find their phone lines dead, so if they tried to call, they wouldn't get a dial tone or anything. And of course, the windows were always open or gently removed, but never shattered. He has never broken a window. Right? He was that skilled. I mean, this attacker, silent, precise, always disappearing before police could track him. And the worst part, most of these victims never even reported it. Imagine that. People who had survived wars, built families, worked their entire lives, and now in their final years, they were too broken to even speak about what happened. By the late 1990s, this wasn't just about the individual victims anymore. No, an entire community was living in fear. This wasn't just some random burglar. This was a predator, a stalker, a ghost that moved through the streets at night, slipping into homes without a trace. Now, there were times where we would actually break into 2 or 3 houses in one night. And it was only getting worse. Now, imagine being 70, 80, 90 years old, alone in your home, and every night you go to bed wondering if tonight will be the night Night Stalker comes for you. Some people stopped sleeping altogether. Some moved furniture in front of their doors, hoping it would slow him down. Some left their porch lights on all night, even though they knew it wouldn't matter. Some moved out of their homes entirely, too terrified to stay. Because the worst part wasn't just that he was attacking people. It was that he was never caught. For nearly 2 decades, elderly people in Southeast London went to bed with one thought in their mind. Will I be next? The police, they weren't blind. They saw the pattern. They knew they had a predator on their hands. So in 1998, they launched Operation Minstead, one of the largest manhunts in British history, dedicated to catching this one man. A massive police effort, hundreds of officers, endless surveillance, and guess what? Nothing. The guy was a phantom. For years, detectives ran into dead ends. No fingerprints, no clear DNA match. They tried tracking him, setting traps. Nothing worked. And every time they thought they were closing in, boom, he disappeared again. Until 1999. And this is where the police made one of the biggest mistakes in modern crime history.
So I think the reason the police took so long to catch Delroy was because Delroy, he operated in cycles, right? He would go on long sprees and then he would stop for like some period of time and then he'd attack again. Additionally, the police that were, investigating were from different boroughs. And as such, there was a lack of coordination, right? Because each borough, they were working independently and there was no proper communication or collaboration. And as such, that resulted in, the hindrance of the investigation as a whole.
Yeah. The Night Stalker has been terrorizing southeast London for 7 years, and the police, they still have no idea who he is. Then finally a break in the case. A witness sees a BMW near the scene of a burglary. Something feels off, so they do the right thing. They call the police. Now, this is huge. A potential getaway car. Finally, something solid. So the police trace the license plate, and it leads them to a name, Delroy Grant. I mean, this is where everything goes terribly wrong. As they come upon this name, Delroy Grant, and right away you're thinking, yes, they have got him, right? But hear this. There were 2 men named Delroy Grant living in London at the time. And it so happened, coincidentally, when they ran this license plate, they got a different Delroy Grant.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, thoroughly investigating, right, police zero in on the wrong Delroy. Wrong man, wrong age, wrong background. But instead of checking further, they take his DNA sample anyway. And when it doesn't match the crime scene, they say, I guess it's not Delroy. And then they cross off the real Delroy Grant from the suspect list. That one mistake, it cost them 10 more years. It cost 146 more victims their safety. It cost 7 people their lives because they never lived to see justice. All because they took the wrong man's DNA and never looked back. Let that sink in. 10 more years because of one lazy, avoidable, inexcusable mistake. I understand, right? Several people having the name Delroy Grant. It seems to be a very common name.
Yeah, especially among...
But they already had his DNA.
Mm-hmm.
They already had his DNA, and they kind of knew what they were looking for, right? And based on the report, this man did not match the information that they have of the potential suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And what was strange is that they just decide to cross off the real Delroy off the list because this other Delroy DNA did not match the crime scene. I mean, some people would say, "Oh, that's a mistake that could have been made by anybody." But I feel like police officers, we need to be more meticulous.
Yeah.
Right. It's a tough job. I do understand. I was once a police officer, and it's easy to overlook things and so on. But this cost them 10 more years. Fast forward to 2009. By this time, detectives from Scotland Yard, they're utterly embarrassed. They became a laughing stock. They have been chasing this man for years, and at this point, 17 years to be exact, and they still have nothing to show for it. Imagine that. Hundreds of victims, no arrest. A serial predator, a serial rapist attacking some of the most vulnerable people in society, and the police, with all their resources, all their technology, all their manpower, are still one step behind. Then comes a new face into the investigation. Enter Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton. I mean, sometimes it takes a fresh perspective. I mean, you can be working on a case for years and just keep missing the things that are right there in front of you. It's like when you're working on a document.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll be there reading the document, reading this, and you just don't see the mistake until you get like a fresh perspective, like somebody to edit the document,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, here's a mistake. You know what I mean? You left out a word here or that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, our brain, is consuming so much information and media on a day-to-day basis that, it blocks out some of the information. So, yeah, that definitely happens all the time.
Right. No, of course, Colin, he's the kind of detective that walks into a crime scene and immediately starts looking for what everyone else missed. He doesn't just follow the usual procedure. He rewrites the playbook. So when he takes over the case, the first thing he says is, forget the old leads, forget the past mistakes. Let's catch him in the act. And that's exactly what he sets out to do. Instead of relying on old files, bad DNA matches, and endless suspect list, he decides to trap the Night Stalker himself. How? He floods southeast London with undercover officers, 70 of them, plainclothes, surveillance teams, watching, waiting. Every suspicious street, every potential target, eyes everywhere. No, I mean, when I saw this, I was like, okay, so what is he doing different?
Mm-hmm.
Because previously they spoke of the amount of resources that they had invested in this case, hundreds of police officers and hundreds of surveillance and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Colin's approach was a little bit different in that I think he focused on the areas where this Night Stalker, is known.
Yeah. But you know that
to carry out
Colin
his crime.
is kind of like a big deal.
Yeah, Colin Sutton, yeah.
Yeah, because his team was credited for capturing the notorious serial killer, Levi Belfield.
Yeah, he was like a notorious serial killer in London, right?
Yeah, he was also a rapist, a burglar, and a kidnapper.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And that's probably why they were like, yo, you're the perfect person for this dude, to catch this dude, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Whatever he did worked because one night, finally, they get the break they have been waiting for. So hear this. It's November 15, 2009, 2 a.m. It's late. The streets of southeast London are quiet. Most people are asleep, but the police are wide awake. They're watching, waiting, hoping that tonight, finally, they'll catch the Night Stalker in the act. Then it happens. A silver Vauxhall Zafira motor car pulls up near a house. Now, this car was of particular interest to the police because this same car was caught on CCTV in a previous burglary in the area. It was also noted that the car was not at this location on previous nights. The officers on surveillance spot a man in black exit the car, moving quickly in the dark. He's heading towards the house with intention. Now, is this it? Is this finally him? I mean, the officers hold their position. They don't want to scare him off. They want him in the act. And just as they prepare to move in, they remember what's at stake. Because here's the part that will never leave your mind. One of his victims, an 88-year-old woman, raped so brutally that her bladder ruptured. She was left bleeding out alone on her bedroom floor, convinced she wouldn't make it to morning. Another, a 93-year-old man who survived the attack only to die the next day from a heart attack brought on by the trauma. And then there were the others, the ones he stayed with for hours, talking to them, taunting them, making them think it was over before attacking them again. Some Some didn't even have the strength to call for help after he was gone. Some never told anyone what happened, and some didn't live long enough to see justice. But here's what made Delroy Grant different from any ordinary burglar or rapist. He wasn't just attacking people. He was playing mind games. One elderly woman, 8 years old, said she woke up to a flashlight shining in her face. He didn't attack her immediately. He spoke to her. "Don't be scared. I won't hurt you too much." He held her hand. He stroked her face. For hours, he stayed in her home. Another victim said that after he was done assaulting her, after he was done raping her, he sat at her kitchen table, drank tea with her, and spoke to her about her life, as if they were old friends. And some he kissed on the cheek before leaving, almost like he was kissing his wife goodbye. That was Delroy Grant. He didn't just take their safety. He took their dignity. He played with their minds. He wanted to control their fear. And that's what I said earlier when you mentioned the real Night Stalker, that they both had this thing where it was about fear. That's how they got their kicks. That's what really turned them on. Now he's on the move again. So as mentioned, the police watched him. They didn't want to move in on him just yet. I don't know all the details of that night, but somehow an hour later, the police noticed the same man running from a cul-de-sac, got back into this silver Vauxhall car, and drove off. Of course, the police moved in. They followed him quietly at first, keeping their distance, waiting for the perfect moment. But then he notices them, and he takes off 60 miles per hour through the streets of London. The chase is on. Now, this is South London at 2 a.m. Narrow streets, sharp turns. I mean, I've been to London before, and yeah, the streets are really, really narrow there. Like, I thought that we had narrow streets in Jamaica. I mean, right now, Jamaica has super highways, very big streets. But yeah, London, I don't even know how they're able to get two cars past each other on one lane. That's how narrow those streets are, right? So imagine someone speeding on these streets, right? I mean, there's no way anyone can speed on these narrow streets in London without drawing attention. But Delroy, of course, he's trying to disappear into the night, just like he always has. But this time, the police cut him off. The road is blocked. He's trapped, nowhere to go. And just like that, after nearly 2 decades of fear, hundreds of attacks, and years of slipping through the cracks, Delroy Grant is finally in police custody. But wait, it gets better. They opened the trunk, and inside, they found a black gloves, a crowbar, a screwdriver, and I mean, when they checked, this screwdriver matched the tool markings, right, on window frames of the homes he invaded. They also found a homemade mask. This mask was recognized by the police as, on one occasion, this was the same mask he wore when he used a victim's bank card to withdraw money at an ATM in the area. And then there was a blue rain jacket or raincoat and hat on the back seat. And of course, he was spotted wearing these from footage captured from an ATM at some point before his capture. They also found bank cards belonging to Delroy and his wife, Jennifer. So this was game over, right? And when they take him in, they noticed that he had several padding of clothing on. Like he was wearing 2 pair of jeans, 3 t-shirts, and 2 pairs of underwear. And my understanding is that it's quite common for like criminals like him to wear 2 sets of clothes to change appearance quickly, right? So that they can evade the police, right? So here's the first thing that he says to the police. What's this all about? Can you imagine, really, Delroy?
The audacity.
What's this all about? This is about nearly 20 years of terror. This is about 200 victims, 146 more after the police had you in their hands, 7 people who never got to see justice. This is about the Night Stalker finally being unmasked. And this time, there was no escaping.
Now, earlier, I heard you mention that Delroy, he sexually assaulted an 88-year-old woman.
Yeah, I mean, that was his modus operandi. He assaulted most of his victims. And all of them were like between the ages of 70 to 90 odd years old. Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually one occasion where he sexually assaulted an 83-year-old man who was blind and had health issues.
Yeah, I think it, like, he didn't care who they were, whether they were like old women or old men.
Yeah,
he just didn't care. He sexually assaulted all of them.
Yeah, this man who was frightened, as he should, he started, shouting for help from his neighbors. And by the time the neighbor them reached, Delroy was gone.
Him disappeared, take for himself.
He was nowhere to be found. And I think this just shows that people like Delroy, they don't see their victims as people.
No.
They see them as toys to be played with.
Objects, right. Like they're not real.
Yeah, because they lack, the normal sensitivity and empathy that people like you and I tend to have.
Yeah, they don't have that.
Yeah.
That's so true. Now, at this point, when the police took his fingerprint, he told them that it was a waste of time, as they know he always wore gloves. Can you imagine that?
I think his possession of those items just showed that he methodically planned his attacks.
Yeah.
Like, you could see that he was a brilliant man. Like,
oh yeah.
And that tends to be a trend in, like, all serial killers. They tend to be very smart people.
Yes.
Right? Because Delroy, he was aware of the anti-forensic techniques.
Yes.
Right? And he was meticulous in all his wrongful doings.
Yeah. I mean, probably not as meticulous as he should have been, because remember, he left, he always left like his DNA.
Yeah.
Like everywhere. Like at one point, they said that he was at one of his victims' house, and after he rapes her and all of that, he took a can of beer out the fridge and just sat there in her kitchen drinking the can of beer and left it there. And they were able to get his DNA also from that can of beer, which also matched the DNA that they got from initially when he ejaculated, that 80-year-old woman that he raped. He left his DNA over and over on these crime scenes, but it's just that he was not in their DNA database.
Yeah.
Right. As a matter of fact, at one point, he told the police officers that they should look into his own son, because, my son and I share the same DNA, so you probably need to look into my son. He's probably the one carrying out these rapes and burglary. I mean, it's weird. Now, of course, 2011, 2 years after his arrest, the courtroom is packed. For nearly 20 years, victims lived in fear and shame. Some had to move homes. Some stopped sleeping at night. Some never lived to see this day. But no, it's Delroy Grant's turn to be afraid. He sits there, stone-faced, as the jury returns their verdict. They don't need much time. The evidence, overwhelming. The DNA, a perfect match. The witnesses, brave enough to finally speak. And then, the words everyone had been waiting for. Guilty on all counts. The judge doesn't hold back. 4 life sentences, a minimum of 27 years before parole. Locked away. And you know what? He's still in prison today. No more disguises. No more shadows. No more hiding behind a mask of a caring husband, a good neighbor, a quiet man. The Night Stalker is done. But for his victims, the damage was already done. Nothing could undo the fear he planted in their final years. Nothing could take back the sleepless nights, the stolen peace, the shame they carried for something that was never their fault. For some of them, justice came too late, because justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah, so Delroy was 53 when he was convicted, and he's now 68, having spent 16 years, thus far. With 11 more years to go, he won't be eligible for parole until 2036. Now, by that time, he'll be 79, officially.
Yeah, so he'll be an elderly, vulnerable man.
I think it'll be extremely interesting seeing how he feels, being a vulnerable person that, he once preyed upon.
Yeah, I don't think that, him getting a parole hearing 11 years from now doesn't mean that they'll release him though.
Yeah.
He could actually spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Yeah, but there's actually like a study done, a research done in South London, where they found out that South London has an aging population, with like majority of the residents being over the age of 60, and this trend is like expected to continue.
Oh, which is probably why he basically targeted people.
Yes,
in
a
this area.
possibility. Yeah.
I think they said that the last, especially during the time that he was carrying out his crimes, I think the population of South London was like about 3 million people.
Wow.
Yeah. So people, what do we take away from this? Because let's be honest, this case, it wasn't just about one man's crimes. It was about trust. Delroy Grant didn't carry a gun. He didn't break doors down. He didn't force his way in. His greatest weapon, people trusted him. He smiled. He blended in. He walked among them. And that's the scary part. Because sometimes the monsters aren't the ones we see coming. Sometimes they're standing right beside us. People, thank you for taking the time out to watch this video, or if you're listening on Spotify, yes, you can go to Spotify if you are driving, right? And you can watch the podcast on YouTube, right? We are also on Spotify. All of our recent episodes have been uploaded to Spotify. You can find us or station or channel name on Spotify is Watson's World, just the same. So you can go on Spotify and listen to this story on Spotify, right? But if you have not yet subscribed, if you're not yet following us, please go ahead and subscribe and follow us. You can also click on that notification bell so that you'll be alerted every time we upload a new video. Also, guys, this channel, it takes a lot for us to do some of these stories. And so we're also asking for your support. Join the channel. It's just like $6.99 per month. We have 3 longtime persons who are members of Watson's World. They've been a member for a while now, and even when I wasn't uploading, they remain a member. And I want to do something special for those 3 members soon. But I want to encourage people, support the channel, join the membership area, become a member. We'll be starting special content for members, special live stream for members soon, and where we can literally discuss other stories that we'll be doing. We also want to give additional perks like early access to some of our stories and so on in the future. So go ahead and join Watson's World and support what we do here. Until next time, my beautiful people, peace out.